All right, folks, it's time. So get ready, get set, get comfortable, grab yourself a drink, maybe a little popcorn, because here comes another episode of the next conversation. I hope you enjoy. We are live. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. This is going to be a little experiment. So, a lot's happening in the world, always, right? And we all absorb our news from a variety of different means and mechanisms. I know for myself, I'll admit, I'm usually very undereducated and underinformed. I kind of do it intentionally, but that's not really a good idea. Like, we really need to be aware of the different things that are going on in the world. So, this is going to be a little bit of a guinea pig episode, and it's something I'd like to do on a regular basis, once a week. So I've invited and asked Joseph Marc, the Haitian Wanderer, to pretty much lead a newscast, right? Of all the people I know, Joe is the most, I would say, even keeled and tries intentionally to analyze what's going on in the world and what's going on in people's minds, and he tries to look at things from a variety of perspectives. He's pretty open minded, and he tends to see the pros and the cons to a variety of perspectives. So I'm going to lay down the foundation of what I intend potentially this weekly episode to be like, right? So we're just going to keep it short and sweet, 30 minutes max. And Joe is going to pretty much bring up a few things that happened in the past week. Um, he's done some research, so he's kind of prepared. And I asked him, I said, Joe, I want you to kind of find some things that are going on, some news related things, things that might be important to us as citizens. And I want you to talk about them. But here's the key. I want you to talk about them from a variety of perspectives, right? Because anyone listening, I don't know what your political leanings are. I don't really care, to be honest with you. But I want this to be something that could be informative despite your political philosophy, right? So I asked him, I said, hey, I want you to look at what's going on in the world. I want you to explain it from maybe a liberal perspective, a conservative perspective, a libertarian perspective, because I tend to be more libertarian, and also like as an everyday citizen, like someone who really doesn't care, but these things might affect them, and how I want you to kind of maybe bring up some points that might target just what is the everyday person, like how might what's going on in the world affect you person who maybe doesn't care about liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, just needs to know facts and information and data. So that's enough of me talking. I'm not going to be talking during this episode. This is all Joseph Marc, the Haitian Wanderer. I call him the Haitian Wanderer because he's ever moving, ever wandering, ever learning. So I'm going to kick us to you, Joseph, and bring me in if you want to bring me in. But for the most part, I'm going to be silent until you invite me, because this is your domain and you are the newscaster. The nice thing about this is that there's no teleprompter. There's no one pulling the strings. He's a free agent. He's a puppet without strings. So here we go. Ready? One, two, three. I'm kicking it to you, Joseph.
So, wanted to cover two topics. One is a quick hitter. That one about FTX and the cryptocurrency that's headed off by Sam Bankman-Fried and how it went into bankruptcy this past week. And then the second, more in that topic, would be the midterm elections that happened in the United States also this past week. So, in regards to FTX, if anyone who doesn't know, it's cryptocurrency. One of the popular ones headed off by Sam Bankman-Fried, and they have a bunch of sponsorships and deals, and their scope is a bit more out there compared to all the hundreds of cryptocurrencies that are out there. But this week, they just filed for bankruptcy. There was two developments that happened with their company. There was an investment firm that pulled their investment from um, from FTX. I think they wrote down like $200 million in debt because of the financial situation that FTX was going through, because they were hemorrhaging money left and right. And then the Securities and Exchange Commission, they actually announced that they were looking into investigating the company, and that's before they went bankrupt. And I think that was the final nail on the coffin for that company. From someone who's very uh, hesitant to accept cryptocurrencies like I am, it shows how kind of wild west the cryptocurrency market is. It There's people that have heavily invested in a company that looked like they were pretty safe, because they bought out, they had ad sponsorships with the Major League Baseball with signage on their umpires, and they had endorsement deals with stadiums in Miami and in well, just in Miami. I think there was a different cryptocurrency company in LA, but they looked like they were on the up and up, and then out of nowhere they just went out for bankruptcy. But on the other side of the spectrum, it's really more seen as just the market settling itself, and more so kind of um, more so of these companies kind of battling it out to try to see who's going to be the more dominant cryptocurrency in the market. And this was what the intent was, for the cream of the crop to rise to the top. So I don't know. For me personally, I just wish it wouldn't be off the backs of people who are investing in these companies to lose their shirts. Some of them, anyway. I don't know if a lot of people put in their investment in these companies, or if it's just like if they spread out their money through all these different cryptocurrencies. But it would be nice if there was a backstop, just like the FDIC banks that are out there. If there was a way for investors in burgeoning markets to actually not lose their investment entirely for making a gamble. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I'm kind of been following a little bit of this story. Just a couple details. One I wanted to say is that FTX is an exchange, so that's one thing to note. Like anyone who is involved in crypto, like another exchange would be a Coinbase, for example. So it is in a sense, a competitor. At least that's what I'm aware of. And yeah, this brought out a kind of an interesting situation, and anyone who's listening who's more knowledgeable in this, like feel free to drop me a line and correct me. But as I understand it, the issue is right in this here an exchange, right? An exchange is a marketplace of buyers and sellers, and in many cases they are holding the asset or the value of that asset under their umbrella. And in this case, right, like a bank, for example, right? A bank tells you that you have this amount of money on your balance sheet that they're holding, and at any given time you should be able to go to that bank and say, I want all of my money, I want to be able to close out my account. And theoretically, if everyone does that, they should be able to pay you back everyone's money. And from what I understand, and maybe you can correct me, Joe, is that in this case, right, there was a run on FTX, and they really were not able to pay back all the people who they theoretically held their assets. And this is kind of what this is. They had a run on FTX, and FTX was not able to really compensate all of the people who theoretically they were holding their crypto assets. So yeah, no, I think I agree with you, Joe, in that it's a shame that people got taken advantage. I didn't say taken advantage of. That this Okay, I'm going to offer this one thought, Joe. And I don't want to talk too much. This is you,
Mm-hmm.
but right, this is investing, and in the case of investing, it's a shame when people lose money, but they're losing an investment. An investment is not guaranteed to profit. You go in with the hope that you're investing $1 to make X number of dollars, knowing that there is a chance that you might lose your initial investment. But yeah, this was interesting because it seems like it brought to light a lot of dirty dealing and some
Yeah,
less than
that's the rumor.
above board behaviors.
That's the rumor right now. It's alleged. So I didn't put that in the main blurb, but part of the Securities and Exchange Commission um, investigating FTX was that they were stashing money. They were pretty much taking investors' money and stashing it in an offshore account. So that once we find out more information in terms of what's going on, then then we can have more of a definitive answer in terms of what's going on with FTX. But just the
Another thing to note is that this is a company formulated in Bermuda, just FYI. That's
mhm.
not an American company. Go ahead.
And yes, because of their offshore kind of rules and laws that they have in Bermuda, it's a lot of companies have those kinds of setups where they're pretty much set up in Bermuda, and then they have their headquarters, their secondary headquarters in another company. I mean, another country. But yeah, once we find out more information, then we can figure out what's going on there. But it doesn't look so good right now.
And how about let me ask you this question while we're on the topic. What is being kicked around as potential consequences for the CEO and this company's behavior? Are there any legal filings underway? Um, do you know anything along those lines? Like, are there potentially any repercussions for either ill management, which is just saying, hey, there was nothing nefarious, just bad leadership, or there was something nefarious. So what are the consequences? Are there any legal filings? Is there any authorities like the police, FBI, CIA, anyone out looking for the founder of this company at this time?
No, there's nothing on that front. It's just the SEC looking into investigating, and I think them going bankrupt could actually um, I would say that would cause a more in-depth investigation to not come forward, but we'll see. But just the SEC getting involved caused a major run on the company. So I don't know where Sam Bankman-Fried and the rest of the higher ups in that organization are going to get any um, calls from like the FBI or the SEC or the FCC um, to get more get more answers in terms of where the money that investors put into the company, where the money went, and why was there a run on this company when the SEC decided to get involved.
Interesting. And Joe, for anyone who's listening who might be interested in this topic and delving into it further, are there any resources that you would recommend? Any places that you specifically looked at and read, um, preparing for what you were going to speak about today?
So I looked at the Business Insider. They have an article about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and what's going on with the company for over the past year. And then CNBC they had a I want to say like a 20 minute video on um, what was going on with Sam Bankman-Fried and the company itself.
Okay, and I have two questions. One question would be how much money is being discussed as money that is no longer there, who's vanished in essence?
So it from what I've read from the Business Insider, it looked like there was a $200 million um, transfer of funds from the company to a private investor of the company, and there's pretty much saying it looks like it could be some kind of Ponzi scheme scenario where they were paying one investor to they were taking money from one investor to pay another. So that's where the shadiness comes in with the SEC trying to get involved.
Okay, but I thought it was a little more. I thought it was like there's a as far as the people who've lost money, it's in the billions number
Yeah, definitely in the
category.
billions. But when it comes to the SEC getting involved and trying to find out if there's some criminality involved,
Okay.
this is what I saw. This is just
All
one
right.
example.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And just for those listening, I want to, Joe, I want to, so everyone knows, you're, as a crypto person, you are more a skeptical, you're more skeptical of this industry, correct? Just so people know if you have a bias or not.
Yes. It's really the idea of cryptocurrency is actually a really good one, especially someone who has been looking at the after effects of the financial crisis. It's a great idea to try to um, shoulder or move aside the central banks, but it's just too crazy right now for anyone. I'm gonna say anyone, the average person to early adopt into this industry. It just needs to, either things need to get settled within these companies themselves, or someone needs to step in and create some kind of buffer to prevent people from losing all their money because of shady dealings that are happening.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have for number one topic of the week, FTX, the essential collapse of the FTX exchange, the money loss, and the essential uh, fleeing of the CEO to who knows where. And this just in, I'm looking at news. It appears that the CEO was, I believe, captured or at least arrested by Bahamian authorities. So maybe next week we can kind of
Get some more.
continue with the
Okay.
story, and Joe can give you a little bit more of a debrief of what's happened. All right, moving on to pretty much the number one item of the week. That is the midterm election and the results. So I'm gonna kick it to you, Joe. Give us the download.
So ironically, Sam Bankman-Fried, he's been a huge donor of a lot of Democrats for the primaries this past spring, and then moving on to the midterms that just happened, the midterm elections that happened in the United States this past week. Um, and the whole speculation was there would be this red wave that would happen, similar to what happened here in 2010 when President Barack Obama was in charge. But that didn't play out that way. And the question is, why didn't it play out that way? And there's so many different theories on why that may be. And I just think it should it should be delved into in terms of why did the prognostications, why were they so wrong? And I think from the Republican side, I think they rightly believe that there would be a change that usually happens in a midterm election. There's always a backlash from the party that's in charge. It's just it's happened that way for at least 100 years, where the party that's in charge, the Congress that came into play the 2 years before would be completely wiped out the 2 years after the that mainline election. That looks like it looks like the Republicans are going to take over the House, but the Democrats are actually going to maintain power in the Senate, and that's very key considering um, what's happening with the Supreme Court and the judicial branch in general. If let's say if another judge happens to retire or passes away, then the Democrats have control of the Senate to confirm another a nominee that the president would put in for the Supreme Court.
So Joe, I'm gonna interrupt.
Hmm.
Just maybe you can give some more information regarding, yes, what are the powers of the House versus the Senate? So now that you're saying the House is controlled by the
It's
Republicans,
right
the
now.
Senate is controlled by
Right
Democrats,
now, it's controlled. Everything's controlled by Democrats. The House, the
right?
Senate, and the executive branch. Um, it looks like the Republicans are going to take control of the House, but the margins that were being bandied about, that it's not as high as it was once thought. It might be they might have maybe like a 5 seat advantage over the, I think it's like 225 versus 210 or 215. Uh, but yeah, the House, they are in charge of making laws or introducing bills for laws to be passed by the Senate. The Senate are the ones that actually um, take the bills from the House and pass them into law for the president to then sign off as law of the land. And then the Senate also confirms they confirm judges that the executive branch nominates. They also confirm heads of different departments that in within the executive branch that the president would nominate. So they have a pretty, um, I would say, pretty hard job on their hands in terms of what they do versus what the House does.
Okay, so right now, as of now, it appears, but I guess it appears that the Republicans will control the
Hmm.
House, that the Democrats will control or continue to control the Senate. What about the governors? Because there was, I think, a variety of states had gubernatorial
So
elections.
that's
So
the
do you know the results of them?
yes, that's the shocking thing too. It looks like it's going to be 50-50 with Democrat control of governorships throughout the country, and then Republican control of governorships throughout the country. And the wide speculation was that it would be a red wave. Basically, the Republicans would take a supermajority of the House, take a majority of the Senate, and then take over a supermajority of the state houses and governorships across the country. And that hasn't come out to play this week or this past week.
Okay, so question A or one, question one. Why did this concept or the red wave in quotes, why did this get tossed around? So why did people of a variety different of political leanings believe a red wave was coming? So that's question one. And then from your perspective, question two is why did it not result in that way? It was, you hear the term, people said it was thought it would be a red wave, but it was a red trickle. So
Hmm.
can you answer those two questions for me?
From the best that I've seen and what I personally think, those are two separate things, just putting it out there. But from the best from what I've seen, one, the president's approval rating is pretty damn low. It's in the 30s. When you have a situation like that where the president's approval rating is pretty low, it's usually an indicator that there's dissatisfaction with the performance that he has, and the voters are going to show that dissatisfaction in the next elections that are coming up. Two, there are a wide array of mini crises that are happening in the United States and really across the world. But a bunch of those things would be things like inflation, an uptick in crime, um, really a polarization of the different parties that are in play right now. um, Also, backlash to the past 2 years of more so the lockdowns that have happened throughout the country and the ramifications from that when it comes to schooling, comes when it comes to jobs. There's been a pretty massive dis- disapproval of how things have been going in the country when it regards to control of the House, Senate, and executive branch.
Okay. So now let's go back to my intent, right? So now
Hmm.
I want you to look at what's going on with the midterm elections, right? And now let's think about the ramifications of those things, right? So we have the Republicans are controlling the Senate, Democrats are control well, they are in the have the presidency, they also have control of the Senate. We have a 50-50 split on the governors running the country, right? I know that DeSantis won again in Florida.
Florida, yeah,
Florida apparently was very much
demolished.
a Republican stronghold now, which I don't believe was always the
No,
case. Um, some states flipped, some states maintained. Right, if we look at Pennsylvania, I think there people had thought that Oz was going to win, and he didn't. So that state is a Democrat run governor now, which is apparently kind of interesting. That governor, I did not know this, but he cannot hear, or he needs to use a device in order to receive information and have it translated into text, which I did not know that. Kind of just an interesting tidbit. Okay, so now let's go back to my original question of from a Democrat, a conservative, liberal, and a libertarian, and then the everyday citizen's perspective. Right? Maybe you're not prepared to answer this, but
No,
if you are, that's
I
great.
think I am.
How can we interpret or prognosticate? Right? We're just gonna I'm gonna give you the latitude to kind of just like, where do you think it's gonna go? From those perspectives, how would you kind of analyze the results of the election and potentially like the ramifications of those results?
I'm glad you brought up that question because it reminded me of another thing I wanted to hit on. So another thing that another prognostication of why things kind of went off the rails and then why it was a red trickle instead of a red wave was candidate quality. And there's this idea from Republicans that Ch- former President Trump he put out nominees for Senate and governorships and the House that weren't good quality, weren't enough to bring in independent voters. Uh, so that's one thing that's out there that's kind of bandied about in terms of the Republican uh, spectrum. Why wasn't it a red wave instead of a red? Why instead of it being a red trickle? I would say another thing would probably be, and this is another thing I also forgot to mention too, this idea that the overturning of Roe v. Wade kind of activated a lot of young women to go out and vote. People that and youth that wouldn't normally vote in the midterm elections, they came out very high in this term, and that's another thing that's kind of thought on the left in terms of the Democrats. That's a thing that kind of turned out um, voters who wanted to make sure that there wasn't a red wave. So I think those are two things. In terms of the ramifications, I think it's really more just to make sure that if there's a let's say if there's another emergency that comes along, that things wouldn't slow down to a grinding halt if the Republicans had complete control of the House and Senate. If things are to play out the way that it is, which I think it will be, where the Senate will have control over I'm sorry, Democrats will have control over the Senate, and Republicans will have control over the House. There's not going to be any other movement when it comes to new bills being passed. It's just you have a divided chamber um, of Congress, and that's just it's not gonna happen. You're not gonna have any new laws passed unless it's something that both sides going to agree upon, and that is going to be very hard to do in these polarizing times. So I think it's really more so about trying to maintain what the past 2 years have been, or year and a half, or year and three quarters have been, in terms of not going back on the laws that they have. I think you'll also see more investigations from the Republicans on the dealings of President Biden's son in what he was doing in China, and in terms of like fossil fuel companies, and did that affect Vice President at the time, Vice President Biden's ability to do his job, and I think you're going to see more of that kind of stuff happening.
Okay, I want you to. So I was about typing this. So two things I want you to comment on. Uh, what about the switch? So there's certain demographics that typically voted in one direction, and now in larger quantities are voting in a different direction. So, for example, um, Black population and Latino population and Latina, many of which I would say that they use the word, I guess, caucus, but a large percentage of the Black population. I'm using these words like, for those, if they offend you, I apologize, but like that's what we're going to call it. So the Black
Mhm.
population, many vote who traditionally vote Democrat, are starting to move towards voting Republican. I believe that is true. And also, a large percentage of the Latina caucus is starting to vote Republican. So maybe can you comment? And just like FYI for those listening, like I don't think me and Joe necessarily have the same political leanings. So just like that's why I picked Joe, because we're trying to look at things from an honest perspective and try to like be neutral. Like you know what I mean? So like just bear with us. That's why I'm some of these questions. I know Joe might lean in a different direction, so we're trying to kind of play with that a little bit. So one comment or one question was, yeah, what do you believe is the explanation for that shift in Latina population starting to vote more Republican, and also what is the shift of a larger percentage of the black population, which traditionally we're generalizing tend to vote Democrat, starting to move towards more voting Republican. Like, how do you analyze that? What is your perspective on that?
So I think this is a great question. I think with the Latino population, there's a, I would say there's trains of two strains of thought when it comes to this. One, Democrats don't know how to sell their party to the Latino population. It's it's a very diverse population. It's not there's so many different cultures within the Latino population that the Democrats cannot begin to understand how to market to these different factions.
I'm just going to push real quick.
Hmm.
Sorry to interrupt, but just the thing is this: they there was a shift. So many of the people who at one point voted Democrat that identified as part of the Latina
Hmm.
caucus are now deciding to vote Republican. So there was a mental shift, a decision was made to stop doing one thing and start doing another thing. So can you comment on that? Like they lost these people. It wasn't that they were trying to get them to vote on their side. They lost people who were allies. So what do you think from your analyzing the events? Why do you think they lost people who they traditionally had for generations?
So it's two things. One, they don't know how to speak to them because there's so many different factions. They don't know what makes them tick. And to be honest, in my opinion, they don't want to know what makes them truly tick. I don't think they're willing to go in depth in terms of finding out what makes Venezuelans tick, what makes Puerto Ricans tick, what makes Mexicans tick, what makes Costa Ricans tick. It's a hard job for them to try to go into the subcultures of Latino culture, and I think that Democrats do not know and they don't have the wherewithal to do it at this point. Second thing is Latino culture in general. It's very split. It's a okay. I wouldn't say split, but it's very uh, it's a two-headed monster. There's a social conservativeness to Latino culture that I I'm pretty damn sure that Democrats do not know about, and they're going to know about that very soon. They don't realize how conservative they are socially when it comes to marriage, and then when it comes to abortion, and when it comes to LGBTQ issues. They they're very conservative, and at some point there is going to be a backlash from the second generation and third generation Latinos that grew up within that culture, and I think we're starting to see that come into play now. Uh, so I think just the demographics of the Latino culture comes into play, and also just the social conservativeness of Latinos. They need to figure out, okay, this is the group that we're dealing with. We need to play to their concerns and their beliefs. And if they were smart, they would actually turn to the other part, the two-headed part that I was talking about, which is more of the liberal fiscal concerns that Latino culture has, and that's that's always been there, and I feel like they're not paying attention to the dinner plate issues that Latinos that are they're really concerned with, like things like higher rent costs, higher gasoline costs, getting affordable jobs, things like that. They're not paying attention to them, and that's going to cost them in numerous cycles if they continue to do that. When it comes to the black population, in my opinion, the female population is solidly Democrat. And to be honest, I don't think that's ever going to change. The male population is a different story, especially um, the the Caribbean black male population. Once again, they tend to mimic the Latino population, where they're socially conservative, but they tend to lean more liberal when it comes to financial issues, and that's where that group would normally vote Democrat, and they're starting to change over to the Republican side. And I would say in this particular group, I think they were very, I wouldn't say disaffected, but they were very concerned about the role that Democrats played in lockdowns across the country, and the the role of vaccines across the country and how it was imposed upon them. I know this is anecdotal, but I know several people who were not happy in within this demographic group, who were not happy that they either had to take the vaccine to maintain their jobs, or some who I know that completely just quit or vacated their jobs involuntarily, um, and they had to get another job and moved down south or to other places where there weren't any vaccine mandates. So those are the strains of thought that I have when it comes to those two populations or two demographics.
Okay, and I want to keep this on news. I had some other questions,
Mm-hmm.
but this is going to end up more into like a philosophical uh, podcast episode, and I want to keep it kind of news and current
That
events.
always
No, because I
happens.
wanted to ask you is kind of like as the Democratic Liberal Party becomes ever more liberal, because from my perspective, looking at it, is that you're losing people, and I say you are because I'm not. I don't consider
Mm-hmm.
myself part of that group because as you move more extreme in one direction you're losing a lot of people who do like as you turn your back on a lot of uh let's call it I don't want to say habits or qualities like you said I think you said it pretty well it's like these groups who traditionally voted left or liberal or democrat whatever have a lot of qualities that are more in line with traditional conservatives i.e. family values and as my question I guess would be like maybe looking forward, right, as we look at the landscape, right, even though there wasn't a red wave, a lot of people are starting to change allegiances, right? Certain states are starting to shift. Like it wasn't a massive upheaval, which some people, I guess, were predicting, but a shift is taking place. And I guess just to wrap this all up, if we try to look into the future a little bit, and look at your own party because I mean let's be honest like you're a democrat you've voted democrat you would identify I believe and correct me if I'm wrong
Mm-hmm.
as a liberal which in my opinion I don't know what that means because that term just changes ever
Mm-hmm.
frequently right like the liberals of the 1960s might be conservative by today's definition of what is liberal so that's my opinion so my stance but I guess my question is right? If we look, so this is the midterm, right? This is the appetizer. Soon we'll have the main course, which is the big time election. What do you like? Let's speak to let's talk about this from I want you to give this is how we're going to end the episode. If you could give one piece of advice to the Democratic Party, what would it be? And if you could give one piece of advice to the Republican Party, what could it be? That's how I want you to end this episode, right? I want to keep it neutral, right? As you look at it, right? Both sides didn't do as good as they should
Mm-hmm.
have, right? Democrats lost people that they've had in their pocket for the last 60 years, right? I would say the Black Caucus was almost a guarantee. Latinos was a guarantee. I mean, I would imagine many political strategists kind of write those groups off. Like you said, they don't even delve too deeply into the different cultures, right?
Hmm.
Latino. Mexicans are not the same as
That's
Venezuelans.
correct.
They're different cultures, right? Like they speak Spanish. That's maybe the only thing they have in common, right? They were colonized by the Spaniards. That's it. Different cultures, different food, different values, right? They're different peoples, and if you don't treat them as individuals, well, you're missing out, right? Same with the black population. Caribbeans are different than someone that's from, you know, Africa, which is different than someone who's been in this country many generations and is essentially just an American, right? So both sides are making mistakes. Democrats are obviously they're making a mistake. The further left they go, the more people they're going to leave in their wake, right? Who are just going to have to skip ship because, like you said, Caribbeans are religious people. They're family
Hmm.
oriented people. If you keep going too far left, well, the family dynamic they don't really. It sounds like from many groups they don't care about. Religion they don't care about, right? So you're essentially kicking all these people off your back. Republicans didn't do a good job, right? Because they expected to win this in a landslide, and they didn't. This was a very close fight. So sorry for talking too much.
No.
2 minutes. What is one piece of advice you could give to the Democrats? What is one piece of advice you could give to the Republicans? And from my perspective, I hate them both. So back to you.
So I think you position that question greatly, and I think the it's a simple answer, and it actually applies to both Democrats and Republicans. They need to stop catering to their base. Their base is always going to be their base, no matter what they do. The base is going to vote for the base. So stop catering towards the so-called far left. Stop catering towards the so-called far right. You don't need to go into culture wars, which really leaves just a loser for everyone involved. You need to try to cater towards the independent. These are the people that actually um, settle elections, whether it's the presidential mainline elections or if it's the midterms. For both parties, they need to stop catering towards their far further bases and actually just cater towards the independent. If they do that, then they can win elections. The question there would be whether or not they're willing to do that. Both parties, whether or not they're willing to do that. And I'm not so sure that either one are willing to budge.
Sorry, we lost you for a second. Finish that thought.
So I'm not sure where did you lose me?
You said so. Pretty much, you're saying like the key here is that both sides need to focus not on their base, those who are their
Mm-hmm.
diehard
Because they
followers,
will vote
but
for
the
them.
independent.
Yes. And if these two parties focus on the issues that really independents care about, things like dinner plate issues, like making sure that there's jobs for everybody, making sure that the cost of housing isn't beyond reach, making sure that gas isn't unaffordable, or making sure that if you want to go green, it's not out of reach. These are the things that both parties need to focus on, and I feel like they're in their silos, and they refuse to come out and try to extend their hand to the independents because they want to own the other side. They want to own the liberals, and they want to own the conservatives. And I feel like that's not a winning strategy. You can't win elections year in year out if you play to your base. The only way you're going to be able to have a good string of 10 years of dominance instead of a pendulum going back and forth is to play towards the concerns of independence. It's the only way it's going to work for both parties.
Perfect. All right, guys, that's this episode. We went a little long. I'm gonna try to keep these down to 30 minutes tight, just like a little bit of a quick 30 minutes news. But hey, thank you, Joseph, for those listening. Give him a round of applause because this was the first attempt at this. But this was another episode of the next conversation, and we're gonna have to call this a subtitle. We're gonna call it "News with the Wanderer." starring Joseph Marc, the Haitian Wanderer. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and have a good night.